Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 24 of virtual launch for third grade. And y'all, this is our last week of virtual launch. Yay! Can you believe it? We've made it through an entire year. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on our lesson, our final lesson for the year. We are actually covering 2 chapters in this lesson, so I'm gonna try and keep it kind of short because I know, like I said, it's 2 chapters, but they both connect to each other, and they both have to do with events that happened after about Easter, and then what happened after Easter, which is perfect timing because that is what the week that we're on right now. It's just we just had Easter, we had a big celebration for Easter, and now we're in the Easter season. So perfect timing with our liturgical calendar. All right. So we are going to be going over chapters 25 and 26. So this video is going to be on chapter 25, and the next video is going to be about chapter 26. All right, so let's just go ahead and get started. So chapter 25 is all about Easter and Jesus' resurrection, about how he rose from the dead and what does that mean, and the events, like kind of talking about the events that happened on the actual first Easter. And then we're also going to start talking a little bit in this chapter about what happened after Easter, because Easter is a liturgical season in the church. It's not just a celebration on one day and then we're back to our regularly scheduled programming of ordinary time. No, just how the Christmas season lasts for more than just December 25th, right? Or 24th, 25th. Well, the Easter season lasts for several weeks. It's not just Easter Sunday and then we're done. Okay, we celebrate Easter and the glory of the resurrection for several weeks after the actual date of Easter. All right, so that's what we're going to be talking about in our 2 chapters for this final lesson for virtual launch. So let's go ahead and let's read the chapter first, and then I'll talk about it, okay? So again, this is chapter 25, and if you have your book at home, it starts on page 119. And here we go. Chapter 25, Jesus rises in splendor. Early on the Sunday morning after Jesus died, some women went to anoint his sacred body with spices and oils. But they arrived to find an empty tomb. The heavy stone that had sealed it was rolled away, and the body of Jesus was nowhere in sight. A beautiful angel told the women that Jesus was no longer dead, but alive. "He is risen," the angel said. "Rejoice and tell the others." The women ran to find the apostles and tell them the news. Even though Jesus had told his friends that he would rise on the 3rd day after his death, they were surprised. They wanted to see with their own eyes. Peter and John ran to the tomb and trembled with excitement to see that it was true. Only the burial cloths remained. Jesus had risen from the dead. He was alive. We are told that the first person to whom Jesus appeared was Mary Magdalene, the holy woman whose many sins he had forgiven. She was weeping in the garden near the tomb because she missed him. Jesus softly called her by name. She looked up and cried, "Teacher!" Jesus also appeared to 2 disciples who were walking sadly in the country. Once the men realized it was Jesus, alive and well, they too raced to tell the apostles. Soon after, the apostles, who were some of Jesus' disciples, were gathered together in an upper room. The doors were locked. Suddenly, Jesus appeared among them. At first, the apostles were afraid Jesus might be a ghost, but Jesus reassured them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he ate with them. Their joy was great. The apostle named Thomas doubted that Jesus had risen from the dead. He was not with the others right after Jesus rose from the dead, and he said, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, touch them, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." When Jesus appeared in the upper room, he looked straight at Thomas, and he said, "Put your finger here. Look, here are my hands. Give me your hand, put it into my side, and believe." Thomas did so and then answered in awe, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said, "Because you have seen me, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus was speaking about all of us. One day he will reward us for our faith. Jesus taught us by his life, death, and resurrection that our suffering and death will be turned into glory and everlasting life. On Good Friday, he suffered and died on the cross. But on Easter Sunday, he arose from the dead in full splendor. Every Easter, we celebrate this miracle of the resurrection, Jesus rising from the dead. We rejoice because Jesus' sacrifice on the cross destroyed death. Each of us will die one day, but our death will be a doorway to heaven. We will be alive forever, just like Jesus, our risen Lord. After he rose from the dead, Jesus stayed among his disciples for 40 days. He taught them more about the faith and their mission on earth. He told Peter, the first pope, to feed my sheep. He taught all of them to go out and teach and baptize. He promised that he would send the Holy Spirit to help them. Finally, it was time for Jesus to go home to heaven. I am with you always to the close of the age, he promised. Then he ascended to heaven and into glory. Jesus, the King of heaven and earth, has prepared a place for us in heaven too. That is why, no matter what happens to us on this earth, we can be full of joy and hope. All right, so that was the Easter story, right? Like I said, the story, as you know, has a happy ending. Like, yes, it's very sad on, Good Friday when Jesus died, but of course we know that the story has a happy ending and that Jesus came back. So let's talk a little bit about all of that stuff, because there may be some things that you were like, well, why did it go that way? Or why did they do this? Or why did Jesus say that? All right, let's start with Good Friday. Okay, so we remember Jesus died on Good Friday. It was a Friday afternoon. But the women didn't come to prepare his body for burial until Sunday. So there may be some questions about that. Okay, so first of all, let's talk a little bit about the Jewish burial customs at the time. So at that time, in that area, because again, there's a lot of it's desert mostly, and so when people died, they were not buried in the ground like we usually think of. Okay, instead, because the ground was all sandy, because it was in a mostly desert areas, very sandy, it'd be really hard to dig a hole in the sand. And so what people did instead is they would put their dead in these tombs, and they were basically just like real small caves. They were made out of rock, okay? And there would be like a kind of like a little platform or something, and that's where you put the body, and then you would roll a stone in a big like boulder basically in front of the entrance to the tombs to, protect the body. So, and the other thing, so that's what they talk about. So Jesus wasn't actually like buried in the ground. That's what they mean when they're talking about this tomb, okay, to kind of give you a visual picture of what we're talking about. All right. Now, part of the Jewish burial customs at the time were to wash the body, and then you would anoint it with these oils and spices that smelled good. And then you would wrap the body up in these and cover it in these long strips of linen cloth, okay? And again, that was just a way of showing respect to the person who had died, and you were preparing their body for burial in the tomb. And the oils and the spices were also to kind of help keep down the smell of the body decaying. Okay, so that was the purpose of those. So normally this washing and anointing of the body would happen right after the person died. Okay, you wouldn't wait 3 days. You would actually wait. You would start to do that right after the person had died. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, if Jesus died on a Friday afternoon and the women didn't come by the tomb until Sunday morning, why did it take them that long to get there? The answer to that also lies in the Jewish religious customs. All right, so I think we talked about this earlier in the year. So for the Jewish people, their holy day, their Sabbath is on Saturday, right? As Christians, we always think of the Sabbath as Sunday, but that's how it is for Christians. But for Jewish people, their Sabbath, their holy day is on Saturday, all right? So, and their Sabbath actually starts on sundown the Friday evening, okay? So, and during that time, many of the Jews, and even still today, some very devout Jews, don't do any work on the Sabbath, okay? Because again, that is one of the commandments, to keep the Sabbath holy. And so they will not do any work on the Sabbath. And that would start again at sundown on Friday evening and last all through the day on Saturday, until Saturday is over. And then on Sunday, they go back to their normal business, okay? So remember, Jesus died on a Friday afternoon. So by the time they were able to get his body, they didn't have enough time to wash the body and anoint the body with the oils and spices and wrap it up. So they didn't have time to do that on Friday. They didn't have time before the Sabbath began, okay? So that's why they just went ahead. They kind of wrapped the body up and put Jesus in the tomb. And then the women knew that they would come back when the Sabbath was over, and they would go to the tomb and, wash the body and anoint it and prepare it for burial. Okay, so that's why they didn't do it on Friday, because it was getting too close to the Sabbath when they were not allowed to do things like that. Okay, so, and again, this was normally the job of the women. So that's why the women were going. That's why none of the apostles or any of the other disciples went with them. That's why it was the women, because that kind of a job was a part of the woman's job back then. Okay, so fast forward, it is early Sunday morning, and we've got Mary Magdalene, who was a follower of Jesus. She was one of his disciples, and apparently she must have been a good friend too, because she's mentioned several times in the gospel. So she must have been a very big follower of Jesus, probably pretty good friends with him, just like he was friends with the apostles. So Mary Magdalene and a few other women, and sometimes the gospels name them, sometimes they don't, they were going to the tomb to, wash and prepare Jesus' body for burial. And they were sad, obviously, because their friend had died. Okay, and they were probably also pretty worried because they knew there was this huge boulder in front of the tomb, and they were probably worried because they probably didn't think they were strong enough to move that boulder out of the way so they could even get to the body. So they were sad because their friend had died. They were probably worried and anxious that they weren't even going to be able to get into the tomb, and what are we going to do? Like, we're not able to do this final act of, friendship and love for our friend in terms of preparing his body for burial. So imagine how surprised they were when they finally get to the tomb, and not only is the stone rolled away from the tomb, but I love this image, by the way, there's an angel sitting on top of the boulder. Like, I just love that idea of the angel just sitting there like, hey, what's up? All right. So the stone has been rolled away, and here's this angel, and the angel says, Jesus isn't here. He's alive. He is risen from the dead. He's alive. Go and tell the others. Okay. So pretty cool that the very first people, or the very first person who even knew that the resurrection had happened, was Mary Magdalene. It was a woman. Okay. So she and the other ladies ran back to the apostles, wherever they were staying, and told the apostles, you guys, you won't believe it. We just went to the tomb to go get Jesus, to prepare Jesus' body. He's not there. He's risen. Like, oh my gosh, he's alive. And so, I just can't imagine. The apostles must have just been shocked. Okay. And so Peter and John, two of the apostles, ran back to the tomb with Mary Magdalene because they wanted to see it with their own eyes. So, and you might be thinking, well, what's the significance? Why Peter and why John? Well, if there's probably some significance to the fact that it was Peter and John and not any of the other apostles. If you remember from the story of Jesus' passion and then his death, John was like the one apostle who kind of stuck with Jesus through all of it. If you remember, John was the apostle who actually was standing there at the cross while Jesus was being crucified and was dying. He was there standing with Mary, Jesus' mother. Okay. And so it's significant that John, I think, got to also witness the resurrection, because again, he was the one who actually stuck by Jesus the whole time. And then Peter is the apostle, remember, who Jesus, before he goes back to heaven, Jesus names Peter as the leader of the apostles and the leader of the church once Jesus, has gone back up to heaven. So Peter becomes the first pope. Okay, so that's, I think, the significance as to why it was John and Peter who went to the tomb and not the other apostles. Okay, so Peter, John, and Mary Magdalene run back to the tomb, okay? And sure enough, Peter and John see that the tomb is empty, the stone is rolled away. They actually walked into the tomb and they saw, well, there's no body here, and they just saw the burial cloths kind of scattered on the ground. So they were like, whoa, they were right, this is amazing, and it was at that moment that all of a sudden, Peter and John were like, oh, I get it now. Like, Jesus had talked about this and we didn't understand it, but that's what he meant. He literally meant he was going to rise. He would come back to life. This is incredible. And so they ran off. Peter and John ran off back to the apostles to tell them, yes, guys, we saw it with our own eyes. It's true. Oh my goodness. Mary Magdalene stayed behind, I guess. She was probably tired. She'd probably been up really early in the morning. What a day. She's been, all these amazing things that have happened. So she was probably feeling very emotional. So she's still there at the tomb or in the cemetery. And she's kind of crying. Again, she's probably overwhelmed with emotion. There was a lot that went on that day. And she hears somebody say, well, who are you looking for? He's not here. And she thought it was maybe a gardener or something like that. She didn't really see the person. But then she hears somebody call her by name. He says, Mary. And she recognizes the voice. It's Jesus. And she turns around, and sure enough, there is the risen Jesus standing right there. And she's like, oh, teacher. She's so happy to see him. So again, not only was Mary Magdalene the first person to receive the news of the resurrection, but she was also the very first person that the risen Jesus appeared to. Okay. So I think that's really significant too. I think it shows that, she was an important friend of Jesus. And I think it also shows that women were important to Jesus too. We hear a lot about the apostles and the disciples who were men in the Gospels. But we don't always hear about the women, but I think it's important to remember that there were women who were disciples of Jesus as well. There were women who followed and who believed in him. There were women who were with him while he was, being crucified, and who stuck by him and kind of kept an eye on him and were there to be supportive, okay? To let him know that, he hadn't been completely left by himself, okay? He still had friends there with him. And then again, the fact that Mary Magdalene was the first person that the risen Jesus appeared to, and the first person to hear about the resurrection. I think that's important. So, pretty cool. All right, so Jesus, of course, did not appear just to Mary Magdalene. She was just the first person that he appeared to. But for the next several days, Jesus appeared to different people at different times, okay? And he could do that because he had this glorified body, okay? So it was a physical body. He wasn't a ghost. Like, you couldn't see through him or anything like that. It's what they call a glorified body. So it's kind of like the human body 2.0. So he didn't have the physical restrictions that we have, okay? So that's why he could kind of appear and disappear wherever he wanted to. He didn't feel hunger or thirst. Now, he could eat and he could drink, but he didn't ever feel hungry or thirsty, okay? So that's what we're talking about when we're saying, so he wasn't a ghost. I know that's kind of hard to kind of wrap our heads around. He still had like a physical, actual body. It was just like the glorified, new and improved version, okay? So like I was saying, Jesus appeared to other disciples and other apostles several times after Easter. And there was one time when he appeared to all the apostles, and, he was talking to them. And of course they were super excited, like, whoa. I mean, their minds must have just been like, but for whatever reason, Thomas, one of the apostles, wasn't there at that time when Jesus appeared to all the apostles. And so, Jesus disappears. Thomas comes back to the group, and all the other apostles are telling him, oh my gosh, Thomas, Jesus was here. We got to see him. We were talking with him. It was amazing. It was so incredible. Like, he did come back from the dead. Like, what he was saying was true. And Thomas, rightly so. I mean, who can really blame the guy? It seems pretty crazy to think that if somebody told you that their friend had come back from the dead, you would probably also look at them like they were crazy. Thomas was like, I don't believe you guys. Like, I am not going to believe you until I actually see Jesus myself, until I can see, the holes in his hand from where the nails were. I'm not going to believe you until I can actually see it with my own eyes. So about a week later, again, the apostles are all gathered together. Sure enough, Jesus appears. And this time Thomas is with them. And Jesus, is actually very kind to Thomas. He doesn't, fuss at him or anything like that. But he says, look, Thomas, here I am. Look, here's the holes in my hands from the nails. Here's the wound in my side from where they get on with a spear. And Thomas looks, and he touches Jesus, and he sees that, Jesus is not a ghost. He's a real person. And Thomas says, it's a very famous line. He goes, my Lord and my God. It's like all of a sudden, then Thomas gets it. He's like, this is amazing. Okay. And Jesus says to Thomas, he goes, well, you believe me because you can see me. But then Jesus said, blessed are those who have never seen me, but still believe. And when he says that, he's actually talking about all of us, all right? Like you, me, and everybody. Because none of us have seen Jesus, But we still believe in him, and we still believe that he is the Son of God. We still believe that he existed. We believe in his death and his resurrection. So what Jesus is saying to us is that our faith in him will be rewarded. Okay? So it's pretty cool that he was saying that to us. All right. The other thing we hear a lot about with the resurrection is how Jesus conquered death. Like Jesus' death and resurrection conquered death. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean that we're going to live forever? No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean we're going to live forever here on earth, okay? Our time here on earth is limited. Like, we're not going to live here on earth forever. But what that means is that when our life here on earth is over, so when we die, our new life in heaven will begin. So our life on earth ends when we die, but at that moment, our new life in heaven begins. So in that sense, our souls will never die. Okay, like our physical bodies will die at some point, but our souls will never die. They will live forever in heaven with God and Jesus and Mary and all the angels and saints and all the other souls who are in heaven. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say that Jesus conquered death. Okay, it's not that we're going to live forever on earth. It just means that we will have a home with him. Our souls will have a home with him forever in heaven when our time on earth here is finished. Okay, so that's what we mean. All right. The other thing we talked about is, and they talked about in this chapter, is about how Jesus, again, he stayed on earth for about 40 days before he returned to heaven, okay? And during those 40 days, he was giving his apostles some like last minute instructions on how to keep spreading the message and to make sure that they knew what to teach about him and about God, okay? So 40 days between Easter and the Ascension. The Ascension is what we call when Jesus went back up to heaven, okay? Body and soul. So his body went up to heaven too. 40 days. If you think about it, 40 days is kind of significant in the Bible. That number 40 comes up several times. And think about the story of Noah and the ark. How many days and nights did it rain? 40. Think back to in the beginning of the year when we were talking about the Israelites, right? When they escaped slavery in Egypt and they were wandering in the desert. How long did they wander in the desert for until they reached the promised land? 40 years. All right. Think back to when we were talking about Jesus and John the Baptist. Remember we talked about how after Jesus was baptized, he then went into the desert to prepare before he began his public ministry. And how long did Jesus spend in the desert? 40 days, okay? How long was Jesus on earth between the resurrection and the ascension? 40 days. So clearly 40 is an important number in the Bible, okay? That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. And all these times, the ark, the Israelites in the desert, Jesus in the desert, these 40 days between Easter and the ascension, what did all these moments have in common besides the number 40? They were all times of preparation, okay? Preparing for the next step, all right? And so that's what Jesus was doing. Jesus was preparing his apostles and the disciples for the next step because Jesus knew he wasn't going to be on earth for forever. He knew that he was going to have to entrust the apostles and the disciples with this mission to keep the message going, to keep his message going, okay? And so, to teach other people about him and about God's love and God's mercy, all right? So that's what Jesus was doing during those 40 days between Easter and the Ascension, all right? Let me check my notes real quick. Okay, one of the significant things and significant preparations that Jesus did during that time was naming Peter as the leader of the church and the leader of the disciples. And he did that. Well, he did it once before, like way before the crucifixion, when he told Peter, he said, "You are the rock on which I will build my church." Okay. But then it happened. Then there's this other moment after the resurrection when Jesus is talking to Peter. And he asks Peter a question 3 times. He asks him the same question 3 times. He says, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, of course I love you." And then Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." And then he asks it again, "Do you love me?" Peter's like, "Yes, of course I love you." Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." And then he asks it a 3rd time. And you might be thinking, why did Jesus ask him that question 3 times? Like, did he just not listen? Did he not pay attention the first 2 times? Like, what was that all about? Well, think back to the story from Holy Thursday, from the Last Supper. So after the Last Supper, Jesus had been arrested and Jesus was being sent to trial. And actually, if you remember, Jesus told Peter that he, Peter, would deny Jesus 3 times before the night was over. He was like, you're going to deny that you even know me 3 times. And Peter, of course, is like, no, I would never do that. Jesus, like, I love you. You're my best friend. I would never betray you. I would never deny you. I am even willing to go die with you. And then sure enough, what happens? Peter denies Jesus 3 times, denies knowing Jesus 3 times. So the theory is that Jesus, after the resurrection, when Jesus has this kind of back and forth question and answer session with Peter saying, do you love me? Yes, of course I do. Feed my sheep. When that happens 3 times, the theory is that is kind of like making Jesus, helping Peter to make up for the 3 times that he denied Jesus before the crucifixion. So anyways, but also during that was the other moment when by saying feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, Jesus was telling Peter that he was going to be like the shepherd for all the disciples. So he would be the leader. He would be the one who would take care of them. So that is another reason why we say Peter was the first pope. He was the first leader of the church. Okay, now, Jesus did not say, Peter, you are the first pope. He did not use those words, but we can tell by, he was making Peter the leader, the head of the church. Okay, so that's why we celebrate Peter as the first pope of the church. Okay, and then finally, Jesus promised his disciples, he said, I will be with you always until the very end of the age. I will always be with you. All right, I'm flipping in the book to make sure I got everything. All right, and he also promised his disciples that he would send the Holy Spirit. He said that once he returned to his Father in heaven, that he would send the Holy Spirit to help them and guide them. And that actually leads us perfectly into our next video and the next chapter, which is all about when Jesus sent the Holy Spirit. All right, so hopefully you learned a little bit more about the Easter story. Maybe you got kind of a new understanding for why certain things happened the way they did. And like I said, we're going to pick up part 2 of the story in our next video on chapter 26. So I will see you in a few minutes over on the next video. All right, bye.